Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us the second day of the Webstival. It's our last day, and we would like to welcome you to the Webstival of CLIMAAX with the title Together Towards Resilience, Communities at the Forefront. Next slide, please. For those that didn't join us yesterday, I'm Athanasia Maria Tompolidi, your moderator also for today, and I promise to guide you smoothly through our program and keep us as much on time as possible. Whether you are tuning in from a regional authority, a research institution, a community organization, or somewhere in between, we are thrilled to have you here. Because today is all about deepening the knowledge, the tools, and the connections that help Europe adapt faster and smarter. So let's go to the next slide. In particular, today we will start with why and how climate risks are assessed with Richard Smithers from MIP4ADAPT. We will move into the technical guidance of the CLIMAAX Handbook from ECMWF, and then we will open the floor for Q&A session. Afterwards, we will have a short e-coffee break in order to stretch a little bit, and then we will explore big data and early warning methods with the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, Stichting VU. And for the closer, we have kept for you the presentation of the community of practice of CLIMAAX and how collaboration can strengthen this movement with CMCC. So let's get started, and thank you all for being part of this Webstival. And before we move on, I would like to give you some very important information. This session is recorded, and also we have a Q&A button in the bottom of your screen where you can drop your questions during the Webstival. We will pick them up during the Q&A session, and our speakers will answer to you. So before we kick off with Richard's presentation, we would like to share with you a Mentimeter. Please scan the QR code and enter the code in case you come from the website. And let's see the first question. So what brought you back after day one? Let's see. Today is my first day. Interesting. The technical aspect. Interesting topic. Interesting topic. Interest in the subjects. Inspiring. I like this one. We want you to be inspired from our Webstival. Let's see if we have something else. But I see that it's prevailing that today is my first day. There is also another interesting reply: to learn more and the divers of the themes. Interesting, clear content. Thank you for that. We put a lot of effort in order to achieve this. Okay, so it's interesting because the prevailing one is today is my first day. So let's go to the next. And now it's the time to give the floor to Richard Smithers, that he will speak for very interesting topics on climate risk assessment. Richard, the floor is yours. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Athanasia, and thank you, CLIMAAX, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. It's a real honor, so thank you. I've been asked to speak on climate risk assessment, the importance of what is assessed and the way it is assessed for accelerating climate adaptation. I work for Ricardo, a global energy and environment consultancy. I'm its international lead on climate adaptation and resilience, and for the past 3 years, I've had the honor of being director of the Mission Implementation Platform for Adaptation to Climate Change, MIP for Adapt. If you can go to the next slide, please, and the next one, and the next one. Okay, so I would hope many, if not most of you, are quite familiar with MIP for Adapt and its functions. But for those of you who aren't, have a look at the slide. It quickly summarizes what we do. In essence, MIP for Adapt provides central support to the participants in the mission and to the European Commission to implement it, and coordinates the broad range of activities and actors. We aim to ensure that delivery of the mission as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Next slide, please. MIP for Adapt has provided light touch technical assistance to more than 150 European regional and local authorities that are mission charter signatories to help them undertake steps 3 to 6 of the RAST. So actually starting the step after risk assessment. A condition of providing that technical assistance has been that the charter signatories should have an existing climate risk assessment or be prepared to use a national or regional risk assessment as a foundation on which to build. Next slide, please. My presentation will draw upon our learnings from MIP for Adapt's provision of technical assistance, development of a DIY manual for climate risk assessments that we've published on the mission portal, and it's there on screen at the moment, and Ricardo's work globally on adaptation planning over the last 15 years. I understand we've got a pretty broad audience today from academia, regional and local authorities and elsewhere. So I'm going to take you back to basics, as I believe getting them right is in all our best interests. Next slide, please. First off, I think it's really important for us all to align by using a common language to avoid creating a Tower of Babel, or forever we'll be reinventing the wheel, globally and within Europe. We really need to keep things simple if everyone is to understand what they need to do. So MIP for Adapt starting point is the IPCC's definitions of terms and their interactions. And on screen, I've just got the small diagram on risk from the 6th assessment report. Next slide, please. What do you need to assess? Well, taking that diagram of IPCC and unpacking it, essentially, you need to start by identifying the sensitivities of people, ecosystems and species, economic, social, and cultural assets and services to climate-related hazards. Once you've done that, then you need to identify what are the adaptive capacities in relation to those sensitivities. What abilities are there to adjust to the potential damage or take advantage of the potential opportunities presented by those sensitivities? Adaptive capacities are all sorts of things, but I always come down to the standard typology, which is organizational capabilities, technical and financial capacities, and the capacity of the natural world to adapt for itself. Identify and rate those sensitivities and adaptive capacities and combine them, and you'll have identified and rated your vulnerabilities. Look at the exposure of those vulnerabilities to climate-related hazards in future through consideration of climate scenarios, and rate that exposure alongside the ratings of vulnerabilities, and you will have identified your potential impacts. Consider the likelihood of those potential impacts. I'll come back to a tough ask, actually, but If you can do that, then you will have identified your risks and your opportunities. This process, the same process, leads to the identification of both, and that's truly important. Okay, so next slide, please. So what you assess actually informs your actions and your monitoring. It's important to identify sensitivities, associated adaptive capacities, and exposure to climate-related hazards to inform identification and prioritization of adaptation actions that reduce or increase each of those components. Looking to the very illustrative charts at the bottom of this slide, you will see that if you're dealing with risks, then you need to reduce sensitivities, increase adaptive capacities, and/or reduce exposure. And if you're dealing with opportunities, you need to increase sensitivities, adaptive capacities, and/or exposure. And the latter might seem really counterintuitive. I often find people thinking, my goodness, what are you saying, Richard? But yes, there are potential opportunities from climate change, and it's really important that we identify them. In my experience, speaking with politicians at all levels, at the very highest levels globally, I always find politicians the same. They want a balanced view, and in their terms, that means talking as much about opportunities, unfortunately, as risks. Don't do that, and you're not necessarily going to get heard. So identifying sensitivities, associated adaptive capacities, and exposure is also helpful in terms of informing the development of meaningful indicators. The only thing is, those indicators may not be able to focus on those three elements of risk as outcomes. You may have to focus on the delivery of the actions that you've systematically identified to address those outcomes. Reasons for that is because of the length of time it will take to implement, the scope and scale of actions that you'll need to do, the lack of a counterfactual against which to monitor, and the challenges of sustaining long-term monitoring. I've been involved in long-term monitoring for almost my whole career, actually, and yet there's almost no long-term monitoring globally. There are a few standout things, including about meteorology, but you know, we're hopeless at sustaining monitoring, even for a funding cycle, let alone 2 or 3 funding cycles. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, what we often find when we come to help regions and local authorities, or indeed others, is that if they've undertaken risk assessments, they've missed out identifying adaptive capacities. Often that's because people seek to be informed by a top-down technocratic approach that's very data hungry. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of data out there on adaptive capacities. But if you miss out adaptive capacities, the trouble is it often leads to sweeping assumptions about who or what is vulnerable. Often people land up saying the same old things. Oh, it's old people, young people, socially excluded people, people in the global south. No, we're talking about vulnerabilities that result from sensitivities of people, ecosystems and species and cultural and social and economic assets and services to climate-related hazards. So the vulnerabilities are likewise. They can be about people for sure, but they can be about all of those other things. And this is really important because in terms of informing your actions, what we find is that many, indeed perhaps most adaptation actions are associated with addressing adaptive capacity rather than sensitivity or exposure. So not identifying adaptive capacity is a real missed opportunity at the risk assessment stage. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, I think it doesn't happen so often in Europe, but we certainly encounter it globally, that people do something even worse, which is they simply equate climate-related hazards with risk, and they miss out all of the intervening components. That really leaves adaptation options largely uninformed. It leads to guesswork. Adaptation options that really match people's existing agendas. And likely it's going to lead to maladaptation, identifying actions that actually inadvertently increase adverse vulnerabilities, something we truly need to avoid. Next slide, please. There's a need to appreciate the limits of data and models. You know, I was really thrilled in 2015 when IPCC Fifth Assessment Report decided to change the definition of vulnerability to be the propensity or predisposition to be adversely affected. For me, and I know for others globally, it was truly liberating. It meant that we didn't need to consider exposure, future exposure to climate-related hazards at the first stage of climate vulnerability and risk assessment. It means that actually we can use vulnerabilities to inform no or low regrets actions, irrespective of the ultimate scope, scale, speed, or even direction of change. For me, this is really important. You know, we like to think we know what's happening in terms of climate change, and for sure, we know a great deal, but there are also huge uncertainties. And you will have read about those in the literature on a regular basis this past couple of years. You may be able to add to data on sensitivities by drawing upon people's lived experiences. This is really important, and it fits with your theme today of communities at the forefront. And whilst there may be no data regarding adaptive capacities, I can assure you, if you talk to operational leads or key stakeholders, they know their adaptive capacities. They know the adaptive capacities associated with the services and systems that you're helping them to assess. Exposure can be deduced from considering climate scenarios. I've already said there are considerable model uncertainties, for example, regarding ocean circulation, cloud cover, ice cover, and so on. And it's important to remember these uncertainties are amplified, made greater by downscaling. Downscaling doesn't give you something that's closer to the truth. It may be more helpful in some ways, but it's important to stay real about it. Importantly, overarching all of those uncertainties are the political uncertainties. I've been helping countries with their NDCs since 2015. Do I believe that countries are going to actually deliver them? I really don't know. If I look back, I don't have a lot of faith. I feel emotional saying it, but you know, I think we really need to avoid focusing on one preferred future in the hope that it will come true and predict and prescribe on that basis. Rather, it's important we advise the selection of at least 2 scenarios when undertaking risk assessments. And when it comes to considering the likelihood of potential impacts, I often advise that it's more prudent to consider the likelihood of the impacts if the vulnerabilities were to be exposed to climate-related hazards, rather than the likelihood of the climate scenarios themselves. I hope that makes sense to many of you. So next slide, please. Now, up to this point, you may have thought that I'm just talking about direct sensitivities, but actually it's really important also to identify indirect sensitivities, sensitivities that arise indirectly from impacts on other regions and local authorities, or indeed other countries. And examples would be in terms of on other regions and local authorities in terms of impacts on their assets and services, e.g. on infrastructure that thereby affects you. Or in other geographies, things like on trade. I always think, you know, cities are global hubs. You can't afford to just do a risk assessment that looks in on a city. You need to consider all that's going on in order to get to some truth about what your risks and opportunities are. Next slide, please. So hence accelerating transition to a climate resilient future demands collaboration and cooperation, not only across sectors and services, for example, in relation to the mission's 10 themes that I've put on the slide here, but also geographies to avoid maladaptation that inadvertently makes those adverse vulnerabilities worse. Next slide, please. Now, your theme today is communities at the forefront, and you will have gathered already. Actually, undertaking climate risk assessments bottom up rather than top down is, I think, really vital. Yes, we need to be informed by data. Yes, there are amazing data sets out there. There are also huge data gaps. How do we fill those data gaps? We fill them by involving stakeholders and citizens. They've got a huge amount of knowledge in their head. And actually, even more importantly, unless we involve them in a meaningful way, unless we gain their input, people are not going to be committed to, understand or committed to, or have the desire to implement the results that arise from the adaptation actions that arise from the climate risk assessment. So, you know, this is not something to skip. It's something that must be done. Next slide, please. And I just very quickly note that in terms of MIPFA ADAPT's technical assistance, that hasn't focused on climate risk assessment, it's focused on all the steps after it. If you look at the progression of the regions we've been supporting, on the left here are charts for those who've completed before and after the technical assistance. On the right are those who are still receiving our technical assistance at the moment for a couple more weeks. And in both cases, what you can see is actually, yes, they've made or making progress, good progress across all the steps, but remarkably, through getting our technical assistance on steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, it's made them realize that, hey, our risk assessment isn't good enough. We need to go back and improve it. And they've done that themselves and really done better. So, yeah, an important message. Next slide. So look, final slide, Athanasia, because I appreciate I've run to 20 minutes, is that how can risk assessments accelerate adaptation? I think, you know, what I've covered, and I hope will provoke you, is that it's really important that we use a common language, that we identify sensitivities, adaptive capacities, and exposure to inform adaptation actions and meaningful monitoring, that we appreciate the limits of data and models. They're really important, they're really useful, but there's so much more knowledge out there in people's heads. And we need to assess indirect sensitivities. If we just carry on focusing on direct sensitivities because they're easy, we're going to lead us all astray. Those cascading impacts, those spillover effects from other regions, from other geographies, you know, can have a profound impact on our futures. And finally, in line with the theme of this conference, we need to involve stakeholders and citizens. Their views are really important, most important because unless your assessment has their support, your political masters will not wish to see this through, will not wish to redirect budget to its delivery, which is ultimately what is going to enable us to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. I think that your presentation was very impactful. Sometimes it's important to go back to basics in order to be able to make an impact. And I think that it is a very important start of our second day in this Webstival, also for our audience, in order to understand better what will come to the upcoming sessions. And at this point, I would like to encourage our audience to drop their questions for Richard in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. So we are ready to move to our technical session. Next slide, please. With our Christopher Polster from ECMWF, and he will speak to us about CLIMAAX Handbook. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's go to the title slide immediately. Yeah, so the topic of what I'd like to introduce you to today is sort of how the role of the CLIMAAX Handbook is or us in maintaining the CLIMAAX Handbook is changing, considering that the project is gathering a lot of experience right now through many regions applying the tools and the framework that are contained within the handbook, and sort of fill you in a bit on what we are currently doing and what maybe some of the future plans are. So if we can go to the next slide, seeing that for a lot of you, it seems to be the first day at the Webstival as well, and I will do a short sort of overview over the handbook. So apologies if you've seen me talk about this already, but let's sort of get a familiar starting point for everyone. So the handbook is sort of a big product that we're developing as part of the CLIMAAX project. And this is a handbook for regional climate risk assessment. So it's sort of a handbook to carry out one of these steps of the RAST. And our handbook has two major parts to it. One of it is a conceptual framework that is a sort of iterative 5-step procedure that takes you through the climate risk assessment and the things you need to do in order to obtain one in a very structured fashion. While we also have a toolbox that is supporting these steps by providing you tools, which we call workflows. And these tools get you hands-on with data from climate models, which with data sets like land use data sets, population information, where you really get a quantitative sense of the potential risk, which we consider as a combination of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. We have these workflows in the handbook for 7 different hazards, from floods and rainfall and snow, over droughts, heat waves, and fire. And we also have a category of for storm. Now, the handbook is available to everyone. We're not just developing it sort of for ourselves in the project. It's just a website. It's open source. Someone posted the link in the chat. Excellent. So this is really something that everyone can use. And the ambition here is that it gives you, from the toolbox side, sort of a set of ready-to-go tools. We try, and I think we've been pretty successful at that, to configure sort of good defaults for all of the tools. So you have a data set already pre-configured. Most of these data sets have European coverage or even global coverage in some cases. And we're providing you with lots of customization options so that you can start from this sort of larger scale assessment and then really start to make it your own by going towards the regional scale. Of course, offering all that flexibility does mean that some technical expertise is required in order to work with these tools. Many of the regions that we are working with in the project have a contractor that they're working with that has expertise in, say, well, our workflows are in the Python programming language, but Many of the geoinformation firms and so on will be able to work with that as well. But we also have many regions who are working with these tools directly themselves and are building their own expertise or even had it already. We're trying to make this as accessible as possible, but there is a compromise to be made between sort of how much you can customize and sort of how easy it is to use. But as you can see here in the picture on the right, it's not that we're just dumping you into like a coding environment or something. There's text in there that explains you how to do these things. There's some code in there, and then you also see the visualizations directly in the notebook. So it's sort of all contained. And we're trying to take you step by step through it. Next slide, please. Now, all of this is nice and well, but our ambition is not, or our goal is not to just provide you with sort of a top-down European scale assessment where sort of we run the workflows for you, we just give you the data. That's not what we're doing in CLIMAAX, because we don't think it's good enough. We really believe that local context and local expertise very much matters if you're setting up a regional climate risk assessment, and that what we offer in the handbook is a starting point for you to adapt all of these tools and start to consider all the different local dimensions that a climate risk assessment has, because these are very important. And following up from Richard's presentation, I think he explained or mentioned many of the reasons why this is. I'll just mention things like the selection of hazards, which exposure and vulnerability layers matter to you, what requirements do you have sort of from a political side, for example, what are the relevant stakeholders, what capacity do you have to carry out certain tasks. All of this matters. All of this is considered in some way in our conceptual framework, and the tools are supposed to reflect that as well. And as we have now many regions, as you can see in the map there from all these countries that are highlighted in blue, within the project, we are gathering this kind of experience right now in the project. So if we go to the next slide, this sort of the basic structure of how the tools came to be. So it sort of started from experts on climate risk assessment, on specific hazards from CLIMAAX that have started to build and fill this handbook with these tools, together with our 5 pilot regions that were co-developing both the framework and our workflows at the beginning of the project. And now that we have more than 60 regions that are using these tools, they are adapting them for their regional context and building on the handbook to really create their climate risk assessment. The role of us in the project on how we are sort of continuing with the handbook is changing. Next slide, please. So the question that is most important to us right now is how can we capture all of this diverse experience that we're currently sort of getting as feedback, as information from our regions? How can we condense that into best practices so that the handbook sort of stays relevant, but most importantly also practical now and in the future? We do think we've laid a good basis there in terms of having a tool-agnostic climate risk assessment framework, which gives you a good entry point, because you can use the CLIMAAX framework for climate risk assessment also without our tools. So if you have done already some work, you will be able to integrate that. But you can also introduce new tools if you like. So we are not sort of very much bound to these things that we already have. There's, again, a certain layer of flexibility which is necessary in order to consider all of these different requirements that you have on a regional level. Everything we've done, as I mentioned, has been done in an open source fashion. Our development is out in the open. You can see everything that we're doing on GitHub. Essentially, if you see it, you can change it. Sort of is the motto with the handbook. And as I mentioned, we've been trying to keep these workflow implementations very flexible so that they can be adapted as necessary. Next slide. And so from sort of this starting point, our focus is now on integration of feedback, as well as sort of capturing some of these customizations that our users, our regions are making, in order to become sort of the facilitators of exchange. So we don't just want to have these workflows as they are right now. We want to also showcase, as part of the handbook, the specific approaches that different regions have taken, the choices that they've made along the way, and also display some of the results that they've done so that other regions can profit from this information and use it as inspiration, as ideas, maybe to understand certain limitations of these workflows as well, which is always important. So the vision here is that the handbook is really a community-driven resource, and maybe eventually even will be community maintained so that it can outlast the CLIMAAX project, essentially. Next slide, please. So there's already a couple of places where you can find this in the handbook. First of all, of course, the workflows themselves. We are making additions and improvements on these workflows based on the feedback that we're getting from the region, based on all the interactions we have with them when we are supporting them in the technical aspects. So focusing on making things easier to use, keeping things up to date, maybe adding references or integrating new data sets. Fixing bugs in some cases as well. So a lot of the things we try to directly put into the workflows to improve them. On the other hand, we have sort of pages specifically on sort of a more question and answer based format. These are on the one hand the pages on the guiding questions for the CLIMAAX framework, where you can find answers from, or example answers on sort of how have our pilot region approached these questions that you're answering as you're stepping through the framework. And we also have a frequently asked question page in the handbook that is sort of a catch-all for other things that is steadily getting expanded every month with new information. You can find all our project outputs from us, but mainly from the regions that are currently doing this on Zenodo as well. So in this sense, we are again practicing sort of this open development within CLIMAAX. Next slide, please. But since this is all somewhat still static and it relies a lot on us to sort of make these changes in the handbook, we've recently introduced 2 new features, and I want to end my presentation on introducing you to those. And these are all happening within our GitHub space, which is, as I mentioned, where we are developing the handbook. And we think it's a really nice platform to have sort of this integrated exchange or development that we're doing there. And so we've recently set up our discussion space on GitHub. This is essentially sort of a traditional forum type thing that is very well integrated into the GitHub platform. And this is a place where you can look at it just without an account. If you have a GitHub account, you can participate, and GitHub accounts are free. So the threshold to participation there is really quite low. You can have a look at, we're posting whenever we're making updates to the handbook. We have plenty of categories for you to showcase your results. You can look at the results from other regions then, of course. You have a question about a workflow, be it technical or on a data set. Maybe you also have a question on the framework. This is a place where you can ask it. You can get in contact with us from the project, but you can also get in contact with other regions. Essentially for us, it's sort of a step to expand our support to a larger audience, but we're also taking steps for sort of regions to exchange with each other directly without sort of having to go through us in the project, and we're only the facilitators of this exchange, as I mentioned. And the next slide, please. The same goes for our new examples repository, which you also find on GitHub. And this is essentially supposed to be a catalog of workflow applications. So the idea is that many of the modifications and improvements, adaptations that our regions are doing with our tools, or that they are developing themselves, maybe on top of their tools, maybe independently of that, are interesting to, of course, everyone else, because they are good examples of how to do things really from a practical point of view. And these things can be very difficult to capture in sort of a generic fashion in the handbook. And so we've decided that the way that we want to approach this is through a catalog of examples. So what we're hoping is that this will fill itself, and this is sort of where you're coming in, with many examples of applying our tools, maybe references to other tools that you've used, so that there is an opportunity for you to explore what have others done, and maybe is there something in there that we can do ourselves as well. Yeah, so last slide, and I will finish up. So this is really me saying that as we are sort of getting into the later stages of the CLIMAAX project, and as the handbook is more and more driven by the regions that are using it, which in many cases probably now have more experience with these tools than we have ourselves, it's really more and more your turn to have a look at the handbook, to really make it your own, so that you can get your climate risk assessment, your risk analysis that is relevant for your local context. And we would really encourage you to sort of give back by contributing through this collaborative GitHub platform, posting in the discussions forum if you'd like to exchange something there, showcasing your results, asking questions if you need technical assistance, being able to engage with other regions, but also send us your examples. If you've used one of our tools, you've made some modifications, feel free to show it to us. We've set up a process. It should be relatively easy for you to do that. And we really want to integrate these things either directly into the handbook or as part of this catalog, sort of in a surrounding ecosystem, so that the handbook is not this top-down sort of resource, but really something where we can make a peer-to-peer exchange of this experience happen. So you can find all of what I've just said on 2 pages in the handbook. You find them in the menu structure. You don't have to type off these URLs, where everything about this is summarized. So feel free to visit those and sort of get a recap on what I've just said if you're interested in any of these features. And also be sure to stick around for Fulvio's presentation later on the community of practice, which is sort of the complementing cornerstone of our efforts to really capture local experience as part of the handbook ecosystem. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. It was very interesting, the presentation for the handbook. In the meantime, we are delayed 10 minutes. So before I go to Q&A, that you have done a great job considering the questions that the audience has shared with us there, I will go to a Mentimeter. Let's see what the Ment is having for us. Which of these is most important when you are using adaptation tools? Accessibility, accuracy, usability, relevance to local context, or interoperability? Please drop your answers. Usability is prevailing. Interesting. Then it's relevance to local context. Then it is accessibility and accuracy. So usability is the winner of this question. And I think we can, let's see if it will change the results before we go to the next question. So usability and relevant to the local context are the winners. I think we are ready to go to the next question. What would you like to see in future iterations of the CLIMAAX handbook? Please drop your answers. We need to know in order to become better and better. Urban flash flood. Compound hazards. Statistics between models. Adaptation limits. Landslides. Droughts. How to integrate new data. Landslides and erosion. Adaptation limits. Statistics between models. And landslides are prevailing together with urban flash floods. And we have also urban heat waves and wildfires. Quantify qualitative data and footprint tools. Interesting. So with landslides being the winner and urban flash floods and adaptation limits following, I think we can move to the next, which is the Q&A session. So let's see what are your questions. I will start with the first one. Anonymous, very interesting talk by Richard Smithers. Could you please explain once more whether or not we should consider more than one scenario when doing climate risk assessment? Please also elaborate, if you can, the point you made about the likelihood of impacts as opposed to the likelihood of the scenario, as I feel this is a key point. Many thanks. Richard, are you with us?
I am with you, yes.
Good.
Okay, so climate scenarios. Look, the issue with climate scenarios is that's exactly what they are. They're not predictions of the future. They're merely projections. You know, all models are wrong. Some models are useful, and the point I was making is that if you just focus on one climate scenario, it doesn't give you much scope in terms of thinking about potential futures and what you need to do in relation to them. We advise actually use of at least two scenarios. Our preference is to use the middle of the road SSP and the fossil fueled development pathway SSP. Why? The middle of the road scenario, which from memory is projects a future global temperature increase of 2.1 to 3 point something, has actually been identified in high impact published literature as the most likely scenario right now. The fossil fuel development pathway, unfortunately, is our current trajectory, 3.7 degrees plus. NDCs don't quite add up to as bad a situation as that, but we're not currently delivering on the NDCs. So that's why it's worth looking at more than one scenario. It honestly doesn't complicate things too much. You know, you'll have identified your sensitivities and your adaptive capacities to rate your vulnerabilities. You've done that. You're now looking at exposure of those vulnerabilities under a couple of scenarios instead of one. well worth doing. In terms of likelihood, the issue with likelihood is if you consider the likelihood of potential impacts in terms of the likelihood of exposure projected by the climate scenario, well, you're kidding yourself. I mean, IPCC in AR6 refused to put likelihoods on, in AR5 refused to put, AR6, sorry, I'm getting confused. AR6 refused to put likelihoods on future scenarios. It's too difficult. I mean, the gross political uncertainties associated with those scenarios, you can't do it. So much better to look at likelihood of the impact if that vulnerability is exposed in that way. What's the likelihood of that happening and that equating to a risk? You might say it's semantic, but I think it's quite important. I'm not sure if I've explained that sufficiently well, but we're lack of time, but there we go.
Thank you very much, Richard. I will move to the next question from Sumaya. Hello. In this handbook, you have considered IPCC's R5 framework or R6 risk due to climate impacts, quantifying risk as an interaction of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. However, what is your stance on risks arising from responses to climate change? The second part of risk framing by the R6, are you considering its use to quantify and supplement the risk assessment framework in the future? I think this is going to Christopher.
I was hoping that Michaela would be able to say something.
And
about
Michaela,
that.
of course, yes.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I cannot see the question in the chat anymore because I was kicked out.
So, in this handbook, you have considered IPCC's R5 framework or R6 risk due to climate impacts, quantifying risk as an interaction of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. However, what is your stance on risks arising from responses to climate change? The second part of risk framing by the R6, are you considering its use to quantify and supplement the risk assessment framework in the future?
So in the CLIMAAX framework, thank you for reading this to me and sending it to me also. So in the CLIMAAX framework, we have in the third step, so the risk analysis step, we have, as Christopher said, risk is the interplay of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. And of course, we also wanted to include the most recent conceptualization of risk, so from the IPCC AR6, where also the response is the fourth factor of driving factor of climate risk. So in the fourth framework step, so in the key risk assessment step, this is actually where we include the response, but not in a quantitative way as it is done in the risk analysis step, but in a qualitative way. So we have these three pillars, so assessing severity, urgency, and the third pillar would be the capacity. And in this sense, the capacity is the given response that the region or that the community already has to deal with the risk. Yeah, so regarding the quantification of it, that's of course a bit difficult, and we are actually currently working on it, because you can quantify, for example, a dam or something like that, but it's difficult to quantify how a society responds, for example, the social cohesion, or also for financial capabilities. So these more soft aspects that are also important for dealing with the risk. That's still difficult to do, and yeah, we're working on it to bring everything together. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I will move on to the next question that it's for Richard regarding the technical assistance section in Richard Smithers' presentation. Which steps in the adaptation planning process showed the most significant improvement after the support, and what factors contributed to that progress?
Okay, so I'm just going to check the slide, but I think from memory that it's steps 3 and 4, which is, natural really, because, most of the regions and local authorities we've been supporting were at the start of step 3 when we started supporting them. So not surprisingly, they've improved most on those steps. If I actually look, I'm looking at the slide now. Yeah, it's a hard one because on each step there's a different starting point. But, there was really significant progress with steps 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think the step where there was least progress really was step 6. What are the factors behind this? The primary factor, which will probably make regions and local authorities laugh who are here, is regional and local authorities' time and resources. We were only able to give them between 10 and just under 50 days support each. It's very little time. We're often dealing with regional and local authorities who only have one person responsible for adaptation or a small team. Our approach was to encourage them to link up with other people across divisions, with other stakeholders, and very much grow their resource base and ability to do this. But it does mean inevitably that, steps 3 and 4 were progressed more. And for those who were inspired by the need to really understand sensitivities, adaptive capacities, and exposure, they went back themselves and they revised step 2.
Thank you very much, Richard. Next question. Christopher was typing. There will be a training on how to use the tool, and especially the Python tool.
Yeah, I was typing, and then I realized that the answer was getting quite long, and I thought maybe it's easier if I talk about it.
Wow.
It's something we can consider doing a session on that again, maybe as part of the community of practice and recording it as well. We do have quite a bit on that in the handbook, though. We do have a sort of how to start or how to run the workflows page, I think it's called. I think the important thing to note is here that the tools that we are using ourselves to implement our tools, they're not something that sort of we've invented or that we're the only ones using it. But these are really things that there's a community of literally millions of people that are using these tools in order to do that, and we're building on top of what they've already done. So you will find quite a lot of resources online, and we've gathered some of them in the handbook if you look through our pages on that, on how to use these tools, how to get set up. We've made a few videos as part of the handbook ourselves as well to show how to do that. We have connected to sort of a free service where you can test some of our workflows directly in the browser. You have no effort in the setup. The caveat is that you can't save your results afterwards on those platforms, but then again, they are free just for testing. So we have some information on that in the handbook already, and otherwise, if you sort of get the right keywords from the handbook on the names of the things that we're using, you will find hundreds of videos on YouTube probably showing you how to get it set up with one of those Jupyter notebooks. And I think that there's many out there that will do a better job than we ever could. So yeah, I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Another question that I see that Dana is typing now. What role can a place-based approach play and also a nature-based solution?
Thank you, Anastasia. Maybe I can answer lively. Nature-based solutions are really very useful tools to make regions more greener, more resilient to climate change. So therefore, we advise that already from the start of the projects, when you're trying to understand the climate risks in the region, it's also good to understand what type of nature-based solutions would be appropriate for that region and would be acceptable and interesting for the inhabitants. In this way, when you're making the step for climate risk assessments to climate risk management, you can already put higher priority on nature-based solutions if they are interesting for that region, and you can also try to make first steps into assessing the effectiveness of those measures and to think about what else is needed if nature-based solutions are not sufficient. But very often nature-based solutions are very helpful to bring the community together. They are easy steps that one can take. They are not very expensive, and they can be really an excellent startup for a first set of measures.
Thank
I
you
hope
very much.
that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Dana. And last question before I go to the Mentimeter, we'll go to Richard. Thanks, Richard, for the intervention. Could you explore a bit more how to assess likelihood in climate risk assessment?
You're still muted.
Look, I thank you for that question, because I was thinking my last answer on it. You know, it's true to say actually that I'm quite phobic. I'm being really open and honest here. I'm quite phobic about attaching likelihoods because there are so many uncertainties. There are many clients over the years who I've encouraged to stop at vulnerability because actually identifying your sensitivities and adaptive capacities is enough in terms of identifying no and low regrets options that work for all possible futures. And nature-based solutions is are very good examples of such solutions. Of course, we often go further and do go further all the way through to impacts. At that point, you still haven't assigned likelihood, but you have considered exposure, and you've considered exposure across 2 or more scenarios. To me, this is enough, really. But of course, people do sometimes want to go beyond just prioritizing impacts to prioritizing risks and opportunities in terms of likelihood. I always urge caution and significant health warnings. As I have said, my preference is that people consider the likelihood of impact if the vulnerability were to be exposed, not the likelihood of the climate scenario itself. And I can't put it plainer than that. I mean, that's short and simple.
Thank you very much, Richard. So we can move on to our Mentimeter before our coffee break. What's fueling your coffee break today? Tell us. Don't be shy. Let's see. Coffee. Okay, makes sense. Fossil fuel, unfortunately, tea. This sounds very British. It's time for lunch here. Okay, mint tea. Coffee and emails. And with coffee and tea prevailing, I think we are ready to go for a 10 minutes break to stretch a little bit and clear our mind. It's 10 and 6 minutes, so please 10 and 16, be back, because we have data-driven algorithms and the community of practice of CLIMAAX. See you in 10 minutes.
We started this CLIMAAX journey more than 2 years ago. And at that time we were mainly working with technical experts, developing a lot of data sets for different hazards. And I think that over the years, working with first the pilots and now the regions, we start to learn what's really needed for people who work on the ground in municipalities at higher resolution.
We have an action that it is a financial support for these third parties. We have 69 applicants and implementing parties from 23 countries and 54 regions. This is really something that the project has accomplished very well, widespreading this help, this support to get a full picture of what is the adaptation from a climatic point of view on the entire Europe.
Seeing that the reality in the field is much different than the common practice, we are working hard to get to know the regions, we are make the tools in a way that they can be used by them, but also learn from the regions what is really needed on the ground, what is their reality, which difficulties they are facing.
The idea of CLIMAAX, which is quite a flagship project, is to work on increasing knowledge on climate adaptation, but at the beginning of the adaptation planning cycle. So it's about making a framework that works for assessing climate risk at the regional level, then to make this framework operational, to make a toolbox really to assess the risk. And then, because the mission is always trying to take the science and put it really into application, really the idea here is to fund at least 50 regions to apply this framework by really assessing the risk. Without knowing the risk we have to adapt to, adaptation is going nowhere.
So we start to refine, and I must say it's really a process of co-learning and co-development in that sense. But I'm also impressed by what's happening now. So they take the responsibility for their own work. Of course, they get the funding, but it also means that they need to deliver.
Our motivation in joining CLIMAAX project was to exploit every opportunity to work on the climate change aspects on the territory of Valchiavenna. We decided to focus on water-related hazards, and in particular on heavy rainfalls and the river flood risk, because the territory is very rich in water bodies and we need to understand more of the effect of climate change on the territory to make even better informed decisions. At the moment, mainly related in using all these new data and information that the European Union is providing, which need some kind of higher level understanding, but we feel once you overcome this challenge, it's really useful, and we are working now also with the regional authority to also have their support and make the best of use of this data and information. We think that this project will be very useful to improve resilience in the territory because this course that started around the topic of the early warning system, the civil protection system, also translates into an improvement in risk culture on the territory. And that's what we want to do, involving also the regional level, the technical level of the municipalities, the schools, the population, and risk culture is a fundamental element in resilience for a territory. The most important lesson that we learned through this project, phase one of this project in particular, is again that we can use, even at the local level, data that are extremely important to understand how climate change will affect territories. And I believe that it's very important that territories can exchange experience in this sense, because even if we are very spread across Europe, we face similar challenges, and maybe someone of us managed to overcome a difficulty and can share ideas on how to do that also with other regions in Europe.
What motivated us to join CLIMAAX was the urgent need for a comprehensive climate risk assessment. Before CLIMAAX, there were no framework or documents with structuring climate risk, climate adaptation knowledge, and public policies. So CLIMAAX offered us these opportunities to impulse this project, doing a climate risk assessment and linking it to public policy. Réunion Island is exposed to many natural hazards, but in phase one we mostly focused on the hydroclimatic extreme. So on one hand you have heavy rainfall, which can lead to mud flows, landslide or floods, and on the other hand you have drought events, which are becoming more and more frequent and severe in Réunion Island.
Réunion Island is a small island in the southwest of Indian Ocean. So it's outside of the European data sets, and the island is so small that it's almost invisible in global climate models. So we had to use local data sets. So the main challenge was to bind all these data sets, find these data sets, bind all these data sets to use them in the CLIMAAX methodology.
The Regional Council of Réunion Island is in charge of land planning, and we are currently revising the SAR. The SAR is the land planning document at the regional scale for the 30 years to come. It defines how we are going to occupy the land, where to urbanize, where to preserve the natural environment, where to develop a climate adaptation solution, etc. So we use CLIMAAX production to inform the land developing documents so we can improve public policies about climate resilience.
Well, it's 10:16 and I think we are ready to start our second part for today. So We have our technical session 2. We have Maurizio Mazzoleni with us today from Vrije Amsterdam University, and he will speak to us for data-driven algorithms, big data, and methods for AWS and climate risk assessment in Europe. Maurizio, are you with us? You have 30 minutes strictly.
I think it will take maybe less time, so it's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Maurizio Mazzoleni from Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and together also with Christopher and Michaela, we developed the CLIMAAX toolbox and the workflow that I implemented. So the idea of today is to give a brief presentation on the potential of using big data on climate risk assessment and early warning system, but also link with the climate toolbox. Oh, okay, thanks. Next slide. Next one. So I started with a small introduction about the need of why we need to assess climate risk, and well, I think we are all aware that climate-related hazards are increasing and have been increasing over the last year, during not only because of climate change but also because of human influence. So here we have an example of the recent flood event or drought event that affect Europe, but also, as was mentioned in the Mentimeter, is not only about single hazard but also compound hazard and risk that can affect society. And this has an impact, had an impact in Europe. So next one. And the impact in different sectors here we see, for example, impact on the GDP or on the population affected by water-related hazard, has affected Europe in different ways, and different regions have been affected differently. And next slide, please. So this trend has been shown that will increase over. So this the impact of climate-related hazard will increase in the future, and that's why it's important to have a better understanding and also better tools to assess both short and long-term impact of climate-related hazard. Sorry, next one. I have a lot of animation. I didn't realize that. Yeah, thanks. Next one. So if you focus on, the presentation will be focused both on short-term and then the long-term impact. So if you focus on the short-term, what has been done is to use early warning system to issue warning. This has been done, for example, first using global models or atmospheric models to then assess the impact, and then be able, for example, first have like the forecast of the hazard, and then going more for the impact, and then be able to issue some warning. So this, as highlighted by the WMO, is the early warning for all initiative. And then if we focus on the long term, next please. As was already mentioned in the previous presentation, the risk can be assessed as a combination of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. And is within these different chains of assessing risk, both on the short and on the long term, that big data can play a very important role. Next one, please. There are a lot of data in terms of big data available nowadays. So it goes from satellite information of precipitation or a number of climate-related variable, but also informations about nightlight or urbanization or location of the settlement that can be very useful for assessment of risk. We have reanalysis information from global or large-scale models. We have a number of in situ information and also initiative of like the Internet of Things. For example, in terms of discharge, there have been a number of initiatives at the global level to collect data of stream flow and discharge information globally. And then we have also more information about administrative and well, sensory information, crowd citizen data that nowadays are becoming more and more available, but then also other initiatives like the C3S. Next slide, please. And here is like just an example of the information available on the climate data store. This was actually one of the main sources of information that we took for the CLIMAAX toolbox, and to assess both not only in terms of hazard, but also to have more information at large scale of exposure and vulnerability. Next slide, please. So if we focus on the hazard data, so now in the next, in a few slides, I will just go through the different type of information that are available online, and then enter a bit more in the detail of how we can assess risk, or we assess risk in the CLIMAAX toolbox. So we have, as mentioned, in terms of hazard, we can have information about reanalysis that comes from results from Earth model, Earth system models, but also from more regional global models. Next one. We have observations, and in terms both of remote sensing information that are becoming more available, but also LiDAR informations. And in terms of remote sensing, now information are getting more at high resolution, but also in terms of temporal scales, we are getting higher also temporal resolution information. So for example, like flood extent that can be very useful for both calibrating, but also validating hydraulic models. Next one. Then we can have information about climate model projections that here are some example of information about models that are being used for assessing projections of climatic variables. And we provide also some guidelines within the CLIMAAX or the handbook of how to use the different type of climate projections. And the next one is about, sorry, next slide. Yes, has a specific data set. And we used these informations in the CLIMAAX toolbox. And the difference between the previous source of information is that this one comes already from a model that have been used to assess hazard in terms of, for example, flood hazard extent based on a certain return period. And sorry, next one. So here we can see a number of, a graphical example of flood extent of for different return periods, but also the different data set that have been included in the CLIMAAX toolbox that can be used as a proxy of flood hazard. And like, for example, the aqueduct, the WRI dataset aqueduct can be, there are also information about risk in general. So not only about flood hazard map, but it can be also used for drought assessment or water stress information at the global level. So this information are available at the global level, but within the CLIMAAX handbook, we try to focus more on the European scale. So next slide, please. In terms of exposure and vulnerability, based on the experience we had on the over the last 2 years and a half, those are the information that are a bit more complex to collect for the different case study, because there is already very good expertise in climate-related information, also hazard, flood hazard, drought, or different hazards. But sometimes what is missing are more information about exposure and vulnerability to better assess risk. So within the project, and also taking inspiration from other initiatives at the European level, we divided the exposure and vulnerability information within more social and physical data. So within the social, we go from, for example, population information, can be age related or more income. while at the physical level, what is available are information about the buildings, the type of buildings, or the location of the critical infrastructures. But also, if you want to focus more on the exposure, there are already a number of European and global datasets on urbanization and settlement locations. Next one. So here is a summary of the already information that are available in the CLIMAAX handbook. We used some of this information also for the assessment of the different risk workflows. And you can find, I'm not going now through all the information or all the data sets. So in the coming slide, there will be a number of like tables like this. So the idea is just to summarize or to give you an idea of the information that are available, the resolution, and maybe the information that you may need within your region that at the moment are not available. So this definitely this information are very useful, but they do not, well, they do complement local information that in some case they may not be available. So this is not a replacement of the local knowledge or local information that that can be used, but is more about complementing the information that have been there. Next one. Here, again, is an example of the location of the critical infrastructure within Europe. And, well, basically the more intense color are the area with higher presence of critical infrastructure. Next slide. If it's fine here. So the previous slide was basically a table of the different data set about population data sets. And what I want to show here that there are a number of data sets, for example, to assess the population at a large scale, with actually the resolution is pretty high. So it can go up to also 100-meter resolution. But we have to keep in mind that these datasets have been derived from different sources, can be reanalysis or remote sensing. So every time we use a dataset, we have also to be aware of the limitation of the dataset. And for example, the global human settlement layer, the first on the left side, they provide a very good resolution in terms of spatial resolution, but the information is available only for a few time steps, while other informations can be more accurate over time. So we can have annual information, but maybe the spatial resolution can be a bit lower. Next slide, please. And this is also that an example that we don't have only information available or past information, historical information, but there are also informations about, data set about future exposure data, in this case, future population projections for different also SSP value. Next slide. In terms of vulnerability data, again, I will not take too much time here. Is the information that are available are more about age and sex, education, income, and inequalities. These are I would say, the main variables that can be used when assessing risk at large scale. And if you go on the next slide, we can see an example of a vulnerability indicator that have been assessed by Rayman et al. So she's a researcher within in the consortium of CLIMAAX, and she proposed an approach to assess an indicator about vulnerability at European level. Next one. And again, here are also some information about future projections, not only population, but GDP for up to 2100 and the information about rural population. Next slide. So now that we have an overview of the type of information that can be used, I would like a bit to enter in detail of how the risk was assessed within the, how can be assessed and how we assess within the CLIMAAX Handbook. So we use 3 different approaches. So first approach is called risk index approach. So the idea here is to assess risk as a combination between hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. This can be done as a normalized product between these 3 variables, and based on the different hazards. If we focus on floods or drought, the hazard and exposure and vulnerability can be different, and we use different indicators to assess these 3 informations. We can assess risk as damage, and with this method, the main idea is to use damage curve and link the different damage to a different level of hazard and exposure. And then we use a more pragmatic approach in which risk was assessed as an overlap between the hazard map and either the population or the exposed asset map. Next one. Here is just a representation of how risk was assessed within the CLIMAAX risk framework. And the idea was to have a flexible approach to assess risk in a number of hazards. So not to have for each different hazard and for one specific region, one specific approach, but the idea was to have a number of methods that could be used in different regions and be adapted for different type of data. Next slide. And the toolbox characteristics, yes, that the idea is that the workflows could be also customized by the users in case, and more for maybe expert user if they see that the workflow could be adapted to the specific region. Data, the main idea was to use data at European level in case local data were not available, to have also a preliminary understanding of the risk at more large scale. So maybe, for example, how in a certain region the risk can be not only influenced by the region itself, but also, for example, by other regions nearby. And we use 3 different climate risk assessment methods, like I mentioned before, across 14 workflows and 9 different hazards. Next slide. And this is the idea. So we start from the identification of the input from the users, and the idea is that either the user would assess the hazard using the approach proposed in the handbook, or they can be used already pre-calculated hazard and risk, like for example, flood hazard map available at European level. Next one. Here is a summary of the workflow that have been used, have been implemented within the handbook, and the different risk assessment, hazard type, and exposure and vulnerability data. And I think I will, let's go to the next slide, because this was already described very well by Christopher before. And here are the different future scenarios that can be also used. Just a couple of slides with an example of how we assess risk within the handbook for different hazards. Here I show an example of how drought risk was assessed as a combination we did hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. In particular, this workflow was developed by CMCC, and the hazard information that we proposed was based on yield, in the yield reduction after a certain drought or certain drought event, and the exposure was mainly, the information of the exposure was about the type of crop and the value, and then the vulnerability was about the irrigation type, so the irrigation availability, how much water was available, and the risk was expressed in terms of economic damage. And here you can see an example of how was visualized the risk. Next one. Again, using the risk index method in a different way, we assess the heat wave risk as a matrix, so as a combination between vulnerability expressed as a population density and exposure, so the overheated area in this case was Zelina. Next one. Then if we then move to the damage assessment, that was the second method that I mentioned before, we use the approach of the damage curve. So if you see in the middle part of the slide, so we have a damage stage damage curve that link the water level with the damage. So based on a certain water level, we can have a specific damage that based on a specific curve. So this curve you cannot really see here, but is based on a certain land use. So if we have, for example, agriculture, then we will have the yellow curve, while if we, sorry, the first purple curve. Well, if you go for more urban area, we can have the yellow curve. So based on the land use for a certain pixel that we have, then we can assess the damage resulting from a certain flood event. And next one, you can see some example of how we assess the flood damage, starting from flood depth and the land cover information. Next slide. Again, here similar, but assessed for the wind. So we use a different approach. Again, the idea is to use similar approaches, but also for different type of hazard, not only flood, but we also use this for assessing wind risk. Next slide. And if we go for a more pragmatic approach, so we also assess risk as a combination between hazard and either exposed population or exposed assets. And here is an example of the risk due to snowfall. On the left side, we see the map of annual probability of snowfall days, while in the right side, we see the resulting, next one, please. So we see the resulting risk map if we combine the information about about hazard and exposed population. Next slide. So something that was not done within the CLIMAAX approach is including the adaptation feedback. So what the way we assess risk is to consider that hazard, exposure, and vulnerability are static over time. But we know that hazard can, well, due to an hazard event, society can adapt. But because of this adaptation, this can lead to higher or lower risk of a consequent hazard. And this is something that we have been investigating over the last, we say, 10, 15 years in the social hydrology community. And something that could be like a next step could be to include this adaptation dynamics, for example, using a more system dynamic approach to assess how including or building LEV can actually increase or reduce the risk of flood in a community. And this model are not, in this case, we see a causal loop, but if we click on the next slide, we can also see how this can be used to assess, for example, different time series or have a preliminary indication about the awareness of the population when a LEV system is built. Next slide. I think I will skip this one. Is this basically an example of how big data at the European level can be also used to assess dynamic vulnerability in Europe. This was a study that we performed within the CLIMAAX project. Next slide. So if we go more for early warning system approach, so maybe this the big data availability can be used in combination with AI in a number of cases. First, to have a better understanding of the detection on non-stationary extremes, have a better short-term forecast, like I will show you in the next few slides. Better understand vulnerability and also the impact. So if we go for early warning system approach, we see that there is a lot of, they've been shown in the recent study that there are a number of benefits of using AI and big data for early warning system. So first, next one. First, we can improve the forecast accuracy because we have more information available. We can have more localized warnings because nowadays, or with the information that were available in the past, the resolution was mainly coarse, so not all the region had available information about a certain like early warning system. So this will lead to high resolution. We can democratizing access globally, because some region that previously didn't have information at a local level, now they can have with the new data. So the next one, that we can move from hazard to impact, more like not talking more about like early warning system of hazard, but early warning system of impact. And the next one is that based on also AI, we can improve the communication using more intuitive way to describe the hazard and better communicate. Next one. And then, yes, better have a better understanding of causality that will actually lead to improve forecast accuracy. And how we use this information of big data within the CLIMAAX. So our Spanish partners, well, Daniel and the colleagues, they developed new approaches to assess the impact of intense precipitation using a more impact-based rainfall approach. So the idea is to use different type of thresholds and to have an understanding of how the high intensity precipitation can impact a certain region. So this is also a workflow that is already implemented within the CLIMAAX Handbook. But then next slide. We see that in a recent study that while before the focus was more on the assessment of hazard using, for example, drought indicator, nowadays is there is a trend in either using impact indicators other than hazard to assess again drought risk. And if you go to the next slide, we see an example of how a number of data sets, for example, here we saw that 20 data sets were used in a study from the colleagues, also from the CLIMAAX project. The 20 different data sets were used not to assess hazard, in drought hazard, but they mainly focus on the impact-based forecast of the of drought using machine learning approaches. So there is also the potential of using machine learning and the combination of big data on more on an impact-based framework rather than hazard-related framework. Next slide, and I'm almost done. Here is similar to the system dynamic slide that I showed before. The idea of this slide was to, maybe we can already go to the also next one. Yes, the idea is to see how we can use a combination of big data or like more flood-related data and the agent-based model to better forecast human behavior during extreme event, and for early warning system to have a better understanding of how or where people will move during flood evacuation, and try to identify the better location of shelters. So here is how we can combine more flood extent information with agent-based model or AI related method. And in the next slide, it was just to show you again how this big data could be used, or well, the increasing availability of information can be used to improve early warning system using a data simulation approach. Well, basically, data simulation is a numerical approach that allows to improve the prediction, the future prediction, or well, the short-term prediction of a certain hazard when new information becomes available. And in the next slide, I just show an example of how this information could be used, for example, from citizen science to improve flood prediction. In this case, was in the Bacchiglione River in Italy. So with the next slide, I would like to conclude and to highlight that big data can be very useful for improving climate risk assessment, both at short term, using, as I mentioned, data simulation approaches or more impact-related, impact-based approaches, but also can be used to assess, to better assess long-term climate risk. Next one. AI and big data can help improving the causality assessment and moving towards, again, impact-based forecast to have to understand if the impact will be related more to like climate-related causes, or maybe also to more vulnerability approaches. And the CLIMAAX workflows allows the user for a more flexible assessment of climate risk assessment. And with this, I would like to conclude, and thanks for the attention.
Maurizio, thank you very much. You were amazing. 30 minutes exactly. Why we brought Maurizio today to speak to us? Because the future and the present of the climate risk assessment is in Earth observation and big data. It's important to understand how much work is behind these maps that we are using in order to understand the spatial extent of our climate. So the power is on the algorithms in order to be able to manipulate all these big data sets. And before I move to the Mentimeter, before Fulvio's speech, I will pose one question from the Q&A. An anonymous from the audience asked, was there an exchange with the CLIMAADA project in the context of the impact curves?
We reviewed the different initiatives that have been like promoted over the last year. So CLIMAAX is not the first one. So there were also the Risk Data Hub initiative and the CLIMAADA model. The damage curve that we used were the one developed by GRC for the flood assessment, and also the building type were derived by GRC. I'm not aware of the other hazards that or like exchange with the CLIMAADA. So we are aware about the CLIMAADA. We also discussed this. We did our like consortium, but I'm not aware if there were data exchange. So I don't want. I cannot say no because I'm not really fully aware of all the different workflows.
Thank you, Maurizio. Yeah. And we have also someone from Iran that is commenting that the Iranian data is mostly missing from the model, or it is incorrect. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes. So the idea was mainly to focus. Well, the model I mentioned, some of them are they provide information at the global level. While also in terms of data storage, we focus mainly on the European level, and so we provide the links for the other data set at the global level, but for the assessment we mainly focus on the European level.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. Let's move on to the next. Do we have a Mentimeter before Fulvio? So what is your current involvement with data for climate risk assessment? Let's see, research, policy, local government, NGO, consultancy, none. We have research, we have local government, policy, consultancy, research was prevailing, and now local government is prevailing. Okay, this is interesting. I think that we can move on to our next speaker, Fulvio, Biddau. that will speak to us about the community of practice of CLIMAAX. Fulvio, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Athanasia, and good morning, everyone. So today I would like to walk you through the journey of the CLIMAAX community of practice, so how it has grown, what it has achieved, but also where we are heading next to turn collaboration into impact. I'll try to be really quick, so bear with me. Next, please. So basically, since its launch, the community of practice in CLIMAAX has become a cornerstone for knowledge exchange and learning within the project, but also as a bridge to the wider European climate risk community. Basically, we connect practitioners across regions, sectors, and organizations who share the common interest and challenge in climate risk assessment. And the community is a structured space that has been designed for co-design, first of all, so ensuring that our methodologies and tools are co-created with the users, for capacity building, so providing the knowledge and resources that members need, and mutual learning and exchange, so sharing challenges, successes, and key resources. So the ultimate goal here is to co-design and continuously improve the climate risk assessment practice at the local and regional level, making sure this is fit for purpose and can bridge the gap between risk assessment and adaptation planning. Next, please. So our mission here was to give practitioners the opportunity to connect with peers that were facing similar issues, exchange experiences, but also getting inspired by what others have accomplished. And in turn, we engage members by asking them to contribute with their knowledge and lesson learned that has helped us to identify best practices, but also spotlight common bottlenecks that many regions are facing. And these insights directly inform CLIMAAX activities, so shaping our guidance and our tools while these are being developed. And also through collaborative discussion and thematic webinars or workshop, the community tried to disseminate the best available knowledge, resources, and experiences across the European landscape to support practitioners' efforts. Next, please. Next again. So we could say that the community of practice has evolved through 3 phases that have been aligned with the project maturity. So first of all, in a first phase, we basically prepare the ground and build the foundation. So co-developing and piloting the framework and toolbox, while in a second phase, this is all about growth and learning. And this second phase marked a major expansion in membership and scope, where we focused on building capacity, providing guidance and support to the early adopter of the CLIMAAX frameworks and toolbox, while continuing testing and refining new tools and methodological updates. Next, please. So the third phase is the phase that we are now approaching and is centered on consolidating the legacy and the impact of CLIMAAX by ensuring the long-term value and uptake now that the tools and the regional experiences have consolidated. I will try to walk you through each phase. Next, please. So during the first phase of the project, as the framework and toolbox were being developed, the community of practice played a co-design role. We work closely with pilot regions, European institutions such as the Joint Research Center and Sister Mission Adaptation Project, external expert, and the aim here was to ensure that the emerging framework was locally grounded, but also flexible and actionable. And to establish a solid evidence base, we launched 2 core activities: a call for evidence to gather information on existing principles, standards, and framework for climate risk assessment, and a survey on current practices. So capturing what are the data gaps, the technical choices, models used, and also the main challenges across Europe. And these insights form the foundation of the CLIMAAX framework and toolbox, and this is based on practical experience on the ground. Next, please. And this foundational work hasn't stopped. So we run continuous survey and consultation to keep identifying emerging knowledge gaps, flag new challenges, and plan capacity building activities. So here you can see 2 QR codes for 2 surveys that are still open, and I encourage you all to take part so we can ensure our work remains relevant and responsive to your evolving needs. Just give you a second and we can go next. As I said, we also ran a consultation with pilot regions and experts on an intermediate draft of the climate risk assessment approach to ensure its clarity, usability, and flexibility. Next, please. Now, after that, we of course tried to disseminate the knowledge that we were gathering throughout these activities. So we organized and supported the organization of thematic webinars and workshops on the handbook with a first overview, but also to support applicants in their application for cascading funds. Next, please. And then we are going through the second phase of the community of practice. Basically, after the first initial development phase and piloting phase, the phase 2 marked a major turning point and a rapid expansion of the community of practice, which now counts more than 250 registered members. And this phase focused more on supporting the funding and interested regions and practitioners in applying the climate risk assessment framework and toolbox and conducting their specific context-specific assessment. So basically, we developed a full program of activities responding to community input with tailored guidance, targeted workshop, and exchanges that have been designed to inspire and support the regional work. And basically, the selection and design of this activity have been guided by the community's expectation, needs, and priorities to equip them with the knowledge and connections that were needed to perform climate risk assessment. Next, please. And to initiate this phase of expansion, we organized a kickoff meeting. It was almost a year ago, and we gathered practitioners across Europe and insights that guided our planning of activities with events that address both the technical but also the social dimensions of climate risk assessment. So we have been doing thematic webinars and workshops on a range of phases of climate risk assessment processes, while also continuing service and consultation activities to refine and update our digital handbook, and feedback loops with the community also drove the development of new tools responding to user needs, which then we supported through demonstration and co-design sessions to enhance usability and refine functionalities. Next, please. So this is very much a recap of what we did last year. So we hosted sessions spanning the full spectrum. So from the practical application of the framework and toolbox in pilot regions to meaningful engagement of citizens and stakeholders in climate risk assessment and adaptation planning, from climate risk communication, so how to translate complex risk data and the outputs from the workflow into knowledge that is actionable to raise awareness of the public and stakeholders, but also to inform and guide decision-making processes. But also how to do next. So how to plan adaptation and maybe also how to mobilize finance for adaptation by exploring financial instruments and practical tools to navigate the adaptation finance landscape, supporting climate resilience building efforts. And also another key component of this set of webinar has been the organization of hands-on stations on new tools. So one was on a dashboard to help practitioners assess regional climate model biases and uncertainties of scenarios to identify the most suitable models and scenarios for specific regions. We talked earlier about the uncertainties and biases. So if you want to catch up with this webinar and about the dashboard, all the videos or recording are on YouTube. And also another session to support practitioners in interpreting and prioritizing the results from the workflows and bridge the gap between risk analysis and decision-making via the key risk assessment step of the framework and the dedicated dashboard. So throughout these events, we of course rely on in-house expertise, but we also try to build synergies with and leverage the knowledge from the mission adaptation itself and other European adaptation projects to ensure our community can benefit from the best available knowledge and experiences. And as I said, all sessions are available on YouTube and you can find them in our website and community section if you want to catch up. Next, please. So now we are approaching the final year and a half of the project, and we are trying to move into a more consolidation phase. So this is a transition from a project-driven community to what we call a self-sustaining community, learning space, and knowledge hub. This phase has the ambition to ensure the long-term value and the impact and respond to community requests. For this reason, we are organizing a set of regional showcase webinars and dialogues. These are based on the experiences and lessons learned from regional climate risk assessment and trying to promote a direct exchange and dialogue between the toolbox development team and the regional practitioners. But also, as Christopher mentioned, we have a dedicated online community forum that is coming, so a new space for peer-to-peer knowledge and experience sharing. And we also have joint events and activities with other European climate service projects and communities in Europe. So try to create connection with different climate services to foster awareness on the practitioner side and collaboration and synergies. So this is for us a crucial step. So we are moving beyond the traditional developer and user model, trying to empower practitioners to take ownership and extend and adapt CLIMAAX resources over time to ensure long-term resilience building. Next, please. That being said, I think that here is a moment of dissemination and marketing. We have a new series, as I said, of hazard-specific webinars that is coming, and each is going to dive deep into key components of the toolbox and regional experiences. And we warmly invite you to take part. Our next webinar will be on November 27th on heatwave risk assessment. Then we will have on December 11 on wildfire risk, and on February 19 river floods. More sessions will follow next year to support practitioners in applying the CLIMAAX toolbox and framework for different hazards and contexts. In the meantime, you can mark your calendar for our next event. This is the first in our new series where regions will present their experiences and lessons learned from applying and adapting the CLIMAAX climate risk assessment framework and toolbox. So we will explore how regional teams are using the heatwave workflow, and we'll learn from the application in 2 CLIMAAX regions, one in Portugal and one in Turkey. So don't forget to register. Next, please. And then a final word on how to stay engaged with the community of practice. If you'd like to keep receiving updates and participate in future sessions, there are several ways to get involved. You can join the COP by joining the LinkedIn group. Next, please. I think we will put the links into the chat, but you can also contribute to the newly launched community forum that was presented by Christopher and take part in our ongoing surveys to help us better understand how climate risk assessments are conducted across Europe and what is needed more in terms of climate services. And finally, you can also subscribe to the CLIMAAX COP via our website under the community section. Just click the register, include your email to receive updates, invitation, and access to session materials. So that's all from my side. I've tried to be really quick because I know that we have run out of times, and I want to thank you very much for your attention and for everyone who contributed to this community of practice.
Thank you very much, Fulvio. So before we all go, we would like to share with you a Mentimeter in order to do our self-assessment, to see what is your opinion about these 2 days of Webstival for CLIMAAX project. Very soon you will see on your screen the Mentimeter. And during this time, I would like to wrap up a little bit. So the CLIMAAX Handbook proved its value as a bridge, connecting tools, data, and practical experience. Today, we saw also how essential strong climate risk assessment is with the presentation of Richard. Your questions highlighted also the real needs on the ground, which was very important for us, not only today, but also yesterday. The session on big data and early warning systems showed the potential of innovation, which is something that is showing the sustainability of this project. And finally, with Fulvio and our community of practice, we saw that our community of practice remain an engine of impact, turning shared learning into shared progress. So overall, they were 2 very exciting days of presentations and discussions. And I want to believe that we will all leave from here thinking about climate adaptation and resilience and how each one of us can add some value to this movement that aims to empower our communities and protect our planet. So these are the closing remarks from my side. I want to thank all our speakers for their impactful presentations and the CMCC colleagues for the great job they did. And let's see how the Mentimeter is going. I'm very happy that I see that you have attended both of days, most of you. Let's see what else will come out from the self-assessment questions. Both of days is prevailing. Great. Do we have a next question? Were you familiar with climate risk assessments? Let's see. Or you heard for first time? Okay. Yes, I work with them. Second answer, I was not familiar, but now I am. This is success. Another answer, yes, but I don't work with them. So maybe now you will get inspired to work on climate risk assessment. So most of you were familiar and you were already working on climate risk assessment. We can move on to the next question. How would you rate the quality of the presentations and speakers? Let's see. The moment of truth. Very good. Fair. Good. Nice. I'm happy that you were happy of the quality of the presentations and of our speakers. Let's move to our next. And do you have any other comments or suggestions? Because we had our inspiration about this Webstival, but always the enemy of the good is the better. Tell us what we could have done better. Let's see. The answers weren't visible. Let's move on to the next. Still, the answers are not visible. Technical problems are always a possibility in live events. Maybe we can move on to the next. Yes. Were you familiar with the CLIMAAX project before the Webstival? Yes, most of you. No, less of you. So this is good. Our communication and dissemination team is doing a good job. And do we have another question from Mentimeter? Great. Now we can see your answers considering what you suggest. A great interaction, the first comment. Step-by-step guide on integrating novel data. Can you share the copy of presentations? Of course, we will take care of it. Would be nice to see from which organizations the participants are from and see them. Okay, we will keep it in mind. To focus on 2 slow slides with practical tips instead of 20 quick slides. Okay. I was happy to meet you. The analyses are good, but could have been more detailed. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you too. Detailed examples of how the initial datasets, like the one in Catalonia, were created. Okay, noted. More technical presentations on the workflows. Noted. Thank you. The 2 days approach is a good one. You can even cut 1 hour or so in each day and still be appealing. Overall, it was a nice festival. Thanks. Good point. Done well with knowledge and research available. Thank you. Very good initiative to be shared the experience of experts. Thank you. Hoping that the scope is for both Global North and Global South. Noted. And last, inspired to bring it to my community. This is the best closing we could have for our Webstival. So, thank you very much for being with us these 2 days, and stay tuned on what CLIMAAX is preparing for the future for you. Thank you very much.